Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. My name is TravisShaddox. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're going to be going over some more soil testing on Turfgrass Epistemology. How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? We've been here for a couple of weeks going over soil testing information and content, and we're going to continue doing that for quite a while. And we're going to stay on base saturation for a little while here. There's quite a few papers to go over. And so we're going to be going over that again tonight. Good evening, Andrew and Gray and Eric. Thank you all for being here tonight. This show is broadcast live on Thursday evenings, each Thursday evening to the general audience at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And then on Monday, we have a members only stream at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And what I've been doing is I've been trying to figure out a way to include an extra show or episode to just go over videos, because there's so many soil testing videos. I mean, you could probably go over a different video every week and not cover all the soil testing videos in 3 years. But so I tried to do that last week where I just went over a video, and I don't know, it was really long. But I'm going to do that again next week, with a shorter video, and it'll be on Tuesday morning. And I think what I'll do is I'll open it up to the public on Tuesday morning. So next week, it'll be members only as usual at 10 a.m. And then Tuesday, where it's a video only episode on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And I'll try to stick with that for a little while and see how it goes. I worked out some kinks last week with the video show I did, and there was some audio. It's hard to kind of get everything to line up with various videos. But anyway, and then what I do is, for those people who might be new to listening to this, I load the audio to the podcast, usually within about 48 hours of the show going on YouTube. I load the audio on the podcast platform so you can listen to it there however you want. If you're looking for assistance or consultation with whatever turf-related or soil-related issues you have, you can always get a hold of me on calendly.com/TravisShaddox. And when you log on there, when you go on, you'll see all the times. That schedule is automatically linked to my Google Calendar. So you'll see all the available time slots. And as soon as someone gets it, then it's gone, including like my own personal stuff I'll put on my calendar, and it'll erase those time slots for available consulting time. So if you need something, you want to schedule time, please do so. Tonight's musical closer is a very different type of music. So very popular band, but very different type of music. I just like this particular song. There was I'm sorry, there was a little bit of chatter I heard. I don't know if it was I don't know where I heard it or read it, but about I'm doing less content. I'm actually not doing less content. I'm actually doing more content, but a lot of it is being held as members only content. So I'm keeping a lot of the members only Monday show accessible only to members for some time period. I don't know. So there's 4 or 5 members only videos for the members to go watch. So if you are a member and you haven't watched those, you're the only one that can watch them until I change it to public. And I'm thinking maybe after a month or two, I'll flip it over to the general public, but don't have any misunderstanding. I'm still doing content. I'm actually doing more content. I'm just trying to figure out how to navigate the membership platform. And, that's the way I'm going to do it for now, is to have some content that stays as members only for some time. Okay. That's all the housekeeping items. I am going to be going over a article today that is a very good article. And it has a really good literature introduction to base cation saturation, and but it's a full-blown study that they conducted. And then on Monday, I'll go over another review of base cation saturation, and then this time next week on Thursday night, I'm going to be going over one of my favorite articles, and I'm going to talk about it here. I highlighted it in purple in this particular article, so I'll remember to mention it. But we're going over base cation saturation. What is base cation saturation? Base cation saturation is, well, it's a con. It's a grift. It doesn't work. But the concept behind it is that the soil cation exchange sites, the locations in the soil where cations such as calcium, magnesium are retained, the concept is that a certain percentage of those exchange sites should be occupied by calcium, and a different percentage should be occupied by magnesium, and a different should be occupied by potassium, and so forth. And it's this balancing of these cations on the exchange sites that is called soil balancing and is base cation saturation. So the base cations being calcium, magnesium, potassium. And so anyway, that's the concept behind it. And I want to show you a soil test report that shows that on there, so that if you're at home or you're in your business and you want to make sure that you understand what I'm talking about, you can go to your soil test report and you can see oftentimes what I'm talking about. So without further ado, here is the soil test report I want to go over just real quick. This is an example. I went over 4 or 5 examples the other night. I don't know if it was on the members only show or not. I can't remember. But I'm going to go over just this example tonight. And it's from Brookside Laboratories. This is a little bit of an older format. They use a little bit of a different format now. But this is a soil test report that I pulled off of somebody else's website because I couldn't find one in my files that had this Brookside example. But you'll see the total cation exchange capacity, then you'll see the pH and organic matter, and you follow this column, and then various samples will be in these columns in this particular report. And you'll get to the anions such as sulfur, phosphate, and so forth. And in this particular example, they have it as kilograms of P as P2O5, and then parts per million phosphorus. So we'd want to look at this parts per million number to evaluate where we are in terms of critical levels. But and then you'll get down to the exchangeable cations, calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium. So we're not really when base cation saturation doesn't really have, well, the area of the soil test report that I want you to look at is not this, because this is actually useful, the parts per million of calcium, parts per million of magnesium, and so forth. This is fine. We can work with these values. Now, what we're going to be talking about tonight is this base saturation percentage, and it has calcium percentages, and magnesium is 66 and 10, and potassium is 3, and so forth. Hydrogen is 13. So this section, base saturation percentage, this is the section of the soil test report that I'm going to be going over tonight. The article is going to be talking about that. So when you see your soil test report and you see that section, which is very common, particularly in commercial labs, sometimes it'll be as a pie chart, sometimes it'll be depicted in different ways. We want to make sure that you just ignore that. That section is hocus pocus magic. It's not valid. And I've been going over multiple papers that support that assertion that I'm making. So when your salesman comes in or a company comes in and says, oh, you need to apply lime when your pH is 8 because your magnesium's too high, that goes right into the book of the diagnostic manual for BS disorders, because lime, calcium carbonate, what the argument is, well, we need to apply calcium because the magnesium's too high. The magnesium is why the pH is so high, so we need to apply calcium to bring it down. That's complete nonsense, complete BS. You don't want to apply lime when your pH is 8 to bring the pH down. That's not how soil chemistry works. But when you hear that, it can sometimes sound convincing. And they're basing that off of this area, this base saturation percentage portion of the soil test report. And yes, Eric, it's like soil numerology. It's the comment in the chat is like, it sounds like soil numerology. It's a lot like that. So those of you who are not familiar with numerology, it's a hocus. But a lot of people believe it, but it's just a bunch of, not conspiracy, but it's just a bunch of magical thinking and confirmation bias. It's a whole lot of confirmation bias that convinces people that, oh, numerology works and base cation saturation works. We've been doing it for 35 years and it works. It's ridiculous. People do things for many, many, many years. That makes no difference as to whether or not the assertion is true. The majority of human civilization, people thought the earth was flat, and they were all wrong. So the length of time someone believes or you've been doing something, the length of time you've been delusional about what's going on in the soil plant system has no bearing on whether or not it's true. So don't believe that nonsense. But this is where they get it from. Okay, I want to make sure everybody understands. So now let's get into the article. And it's actually, it's one of my favorite articles. It's a very good article. The name of it is Base Cation Saturation Ratios, Soil Health and Yield in Organic Field Crops by Chiganti. And it has 7 or 8 authors on here. And they were from Ohio State. So this work was done up in Ohio. And so what'll happen a lot of times with base cation saturation wizards and warlocks and magicians and, basically con artists is what they are. What they'll do is they'll say, well, it'll aggregate the soil. And then when data comes out that shows that it doesn't aggregate the soil, there's no evidence to support that. Then they'll move the goalposts and they'll say, well, it reduces weeds. And then when we find it doesn't do that, then they'll move the goalpost again. Well, it reduces insects. And they just keep moving it around. And one of the more recent being the last 10 or 20 years, what they'll say is, well, it might not work in this particular setting, but it works in organic farming. Organic farmers use it all the time and to great success. We've been doing it for 30 or 40 years to great success. And remember that I haven't got to the Olson 82 paper yet, but when I do, it'll make more sense. That no one here, well, I'll say me, and I doubt any other knowledgeable soil scientists would have a different position, but no one's saying that it won't result in sufficient turf or sufficient crops following base cation saturation. I've said many times, if you follow base cation saturation, you are very likely going to result in a perfectly acceptable high-yielding crop or turfgrass, high-quality turfgrass. It's just that you're going to do that, and it's going to cost you a lot more money than if you just followed a sufficiency level philosophy. Because the sufficiency level will result in the same yield or the same turf quality or the same turf color or performance for far less money. And there's data to support that. There's data to back that up. So when you have a faction of people who have been doing it for so long, they go, well, we're doing it and it works. I don't think it's wise for scientists to go, well, you're wrong, because they're not wrong. They're doing it and it's working. They just don't recognize that there's an alternative and a different management practice that can be used that would result in the same response, and it would cost them less money, making them more profit. So because, that's where I would leave it at that. So until we meet these delusional salesmen and business owners where they're at, until we meet them where they're at and recognize and give them some sort of respect and say, yeah, we know we believe you're seeing what you're seeing in terms of crop growth, but it's just costing you a lot of money. Until we meet them where they're at, then they're just going to continue to be resistant. Now, when it comes to like measurable soil parameters like soil aggregation or these various things, if they say these certain things regarding soil aggregation or soil penetration or soil hardness, well, then they're just delusional. They're wrong. But you can't just come up and say they're wrong. They're just going to be resistant. They're not going to be accepting of the information usually. But all the evidence is refuting what they're saying. And this paper tonight is part of many, many, many papers that do that. So in this case, they're saying, well, it doesn't work here, it doesn't work there, but it works in organic field. Organic farmers do it all the time. And that's what this paper was designed to look at, because it hadn't really ever been looked at in organic farming, base cation saturation. And so these authors did this. Base cation saturation ratios, soil health and yield in organic field crops. Soil health is a big money grab now where people, it's so malleable. It's so sort of amorphous, that term. It's not easily defined. Soil scientists will use terms like soil health parameters. We won't say soil health because how do you define soil health? But there's a lot of federal money and state money being spent on soil health. And when this term came up, I've noticed in my own experience that a lot of the charlatans and con artists jumped on that like a duck on a June bug and was like, yeah, we're gonna increase your soil health. Because no one can really measure it. I mean, you can measure parameters of soil health, but no one can really say your soil health is X, right? We can talk about parameters of the soil that contribute to this, and we can, agree that these parameters give an indication of soil health, but it's very amorphous. So because of that ambiguity in that term, it's ripe for charlatans to step in and take advantage of the less educated or less knowledgeable people in that particular topic. And so they looked at soil health in this paper, okay, and yield in organic farming. This is what they're looking at. Let's get into it. So base count and saturation ratio is a soil management approach that strives to achieve targeted percentages of exchangeable soil calcium, magnesium, and potassium. The development of base count and saturation theory dates back more than 100 years when Lowe first proposed the concept of an optimal calcium to magnesium ratio in soil. In this Lowe 1892 paper, I would be glad to go over that, but I need someone who can translate German because I believe Lowe wrote his papers in German, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But I'm pretty sure those papers are in German and I can't translate them. So if anybody in my audience can speak German and would like to spend a half a day translating a scientific article, give me a shout out. We'll translate it and I'll go over it. But he was the one who first started this concept. And I have no doubt that I have no doubt that he was being, a good scientist. I mean, he was being, he was doing what he's supposed to do in terms of scientific ethics and so forth. But, hang on one second. But, when you do when you throw a hypothesis out and people test it, and they find it to be wrong, you should discard it. But what happens is they just for whatever reason, this caught a lot of traction and kept going. So work by Baer and colleagues in 1948 and 1945 on calcium-magnesium ratios influenced Albrecht in 1975 and Graham in 1959, which finally led Albrecht to conclude that a balanced soil should have 60-75% calcium, 10-20% magnesium, and 2-5% potassium to maximize crop yields. Today, the core ideas of base count saturation are widely credited to William Albrecht. And William Albrecht studies have compared base count saturation ratio with widely established soil management philosophies, such as sufficiency level of available nutrients, SLAN, where nutrient availability is assessed by individual elements. These studies failed to find evidence to support the existence of an ideal soil base cation saturation percentage. So there's been plenty of people who have tested this, and no one's ever been able to determine that indeed there actually is, an ideal ratio of calcium magnesium. It should be X or whatever, right? And no one's been able to do it yet. So until it is done, there's no point in, following it. There's no evidence to support it, so there's no reason to follow it. So we continue. The collective results of these studies has led most soil scientists to disregard base count saturation ratio and view it as a misguided approach to soil management. And that's me. I'm in that boat. I don't see any evidence to support it, so I'm not going to follow it. Despite the lack of evidence to support base count saturation ratio in the scientific literature, base count saturation ratio is widely practiced, particularly by organic farmers. In a recent survey, over half of organic farmers in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania reported using base count saturation. Can you believe that? Half of the organic farmers use base count saturation. I mean, that's right picking grounds, pardon the pun, for, like I said, less than honorable men and women to just jump in and start selling a bunch of stuff they don't need, Hey, Mike Conroy. Yeah, no problem. You're welcome. You're not late. You're just in time. Farmers reported practicing base count saturation ratio because they believe it improves crop performance, crop quality, soil health, and weed control. So, it's okay to have these beliefs, but that's the reason this channel exists. Is, do you have a good reason to believe it? That's really what the channel is about. Do you have a good reason for your management practice, or do you not? Ultimately, that's what the channel is really, comes down to. And when the farmers believe that base concentration increases soil health and weed control and all these other things, well, okay, you can believe it, but there's no reason for me to believe it. I don't see any evidence. However, these beliefs are not held exclusively in the organic farming community. The practice of base count saturation is commonly found in the crop consulting and turfgrass industries. And that's one reason why I've included this tonight, is because it includes a little bit of turf in the literature review. For example, I don't know these authors, okay, but they're not real kind to Brookside Labs. They throw Brookside Labs under the bus. I'm surprised this actually got into a refereed journal. If I was a reviewer on this journal, I probably would at least recommend removing that these next couple of sentences, because I just doesn't seem to have any relevance to the scientific. The validity of the topic at hand, but they're making an argument as to why they're doing this work. So I get that. But anyway, so what they say is it's common in turfgrass industries. Then it says, for example, Brookside Consulting Incorporated. Now that's the company that did the soil test report that I showed you at the beginning of the show tonight. Has a large network of over 200 consultants that widely practice base cation saturation ratio, working with over 2.6 million hectares of crops or turf around the world. It's a lot. They have a big impact. Likewise, numerous commercial soil testing laboratories report base cation saturations and calcium magnesium ratios on their soil test reports because clients often request this information. I'm surprised they got that in, because this is just a supposition. They're not providing any means to confirm that that's true. I mean, it probably is true, but in scientific literature, we can't just say whatever we think. We have to support it with some sort of foundation. It's kind of like going into a court of law. You can't just start throwing stuff into the evidence pile. You have to lead it into the court. And it's the same thing here. You can't just say because of this, because it may not. I don't know. I'm just surprised. This whole paragraph where it says, for example, Brookside Labs, I don't know. It doesn't seem to me to be scientifically appropriate to call out a particular, a specific lab in a scientific article. But I mean, what do I know? Anyway, in interviews and case studies, private crop consultants and farmers ascribed positive changes to soil physical, chemical, and biological properties while implementing base cation saturation practices. And this is a reason I've said for a long time, is that I don't particularly care what someone says they saw. I observed this, or the soil aggregation, it's easier to penetrate the soil and there's fewer weeds. Okay, all right, it's fine to have an observation. That's how the scientific process starts. It's with an observation, no problem. I have no reason to believe it. I'd certainly have no reason to change my management practices to follow it. Until I see some convincing or compelling evidence, I'm not going to do it. And so I get it. This is their observation. But your observation needs to be tested in order to have any confidence in following it from my position. In particular, practitioners most often describe improvements I'm not sure how let me just change this real quick to I figured out how to do this again, so I will do this. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so often describe soil physical structure based cation saturation practices. A core concept here is that magnesium makes soils tight. An application of calcium helps flocculate and loosen the soil. You'll hear that in some of the videos on turfgrass videos. You ever walk across your field and mud sticks to your boot? It's magnesium in that soil that's making it stick, and the magnesium gets the soil really tight. They have it in here in a scientific article saying, people say this all the time, tight. It's ludicrous. It's absurd. But it happens all the time. Another commonly echoed theme is the ability of base cation saturation practices to improve biological activity in soils, which in turn increases nutrient availability and crop quality. Yeah, you hear that all the time. It's just silly. Although claims of improved soil physical and biological function with base cation saturation ratio management calcium ratio management have yet to be substantiated in the literature. There is a theoretical and mechanistic basis for some of these assertions. So what the authors are going to say is, although none of this has really ever been proven, theoretically it's possible what they're saying is true. And they're going to show a few examples of that. And I'm sorry for the subscribers who would like to chat. I had to turn it on to members only chat for a little bit. We have a troll. I don't know exactly what their problem is, but I turned it on to members only chat. I apologize to the subscribers. So it says theoretically it is possible. There is some basis for this. For example, soil structure, including aggregate stability, governs important processes such as aeration, water infiltration, and ultimately plant growth. The role of different cations in altering soil structure through the effects of soil aggregation is well known. Increasing soil exchangeable calcium can influence soil hydrology and drainage, and they have a citation for this, by promoting better soil aggregation, improving water infiltration into the soil. There's another citation. Alternatively, studies have shown elevated magnesium saturations on soil sites can promote soil disaggregation or dispersion through increased clay dispersion, leading to reduced soil infiltration. Therefore, it is possible that calcium applications may lead to improved aggregation and related outcomes. And that's the difference between what's possible and what's plausible. Just because it's possible doesn't mean in practice that it's actually, likely to occur. Okay. And they talk about this a little bit. In other words, technically speaking, theoretically, yes, this could happen. But in real settings and practical settings, it's not common to see that at all. Okay. But that's, any little hook that sounds convincing, a lot of the charlatans will grab onto that and just take advantage of you. I've seen it happen for decades, and it's sad, but that's what we're doing tonight, is arming ourselves with knowledge. Likewise, calcium and pH play a strong role in influencing soil biological communities and processes. For example, the diversity and richness of soil bacteria communities are strongly influenced by soil pH, as are mineralization processes, and soil calcium plays known mechanistic roles in soil organic carbon stabilization. So again, the authors are giving these guys credit a little bit, saying, okay, they're making all these wild assertions with no evidence. But, theoretically, it is possible what they're saying could actually occur. But it needs to be tested. With regard to base cation saturation management, some key questions remain unanswered, including what specific role does magnesium play in soil aggregation process? What role does calcium relative to pH play in improvements of soil biological activity and health? And are any soil improvements with base cation saturation ratios able to translate into improved crop performance and yields? And here's an important sentence. This next sentence is really important. Disentangling the effects of pH and calcium remains an elusive task and was a major criticism of Albrecht's work that originally led to the formation of base cation saturation philosophy. Now, this Kopetke and Minzy 2007 paper is the paper I'm going to go over next Thursday. So I'm going to go over that paper next Thursday, and they do an extremely good job of explaining exactly how Albrecht misinterpreted his own data. He misunderstood the influence of calcium balancing versus alleviating aluminum toxicities, alleviating nutrient toxicities at a very, very low pH. And because he misunderstood it and misinterpreted it, he published all these Albrecht papers that are all based on that. And people, when it sounds convincing, they go, well, that sounds convincing. Look at all this stuff that he did. And when they go out and do it, and sure enough, they see a response, they go, oh, it must work. It must work. Yeah, it works. And no one's saying it doesn't work. Okay. What we're saying is it doesn't work the way that he thought it would work. And it costs a lot more money than the other alternative method, being sufficiency level. Okay. So I'm going to go over that next Thursday. Therefore, experimentation that specifically manipulates the calcium-magnesium ratio without concurrent changes in pH is needed to address these unanswered questions. Now, let's make sure that's clear. I don't want to get into Albrecht right now, but when Albrecht was doing all this stuff, what was happening was he was fidgeting with the calcium levels, but he was altering the pH levels at the same time and didn't recognize it. In the short and skinny of it, that's what he was doing. And what they're saying is we need to manipulate the calcium-magnesium ratios to see what the effect is of that without altering the pH, without including that, with excluding that as a potential variable, basically is what these authors are saying. We really want to know just what is the calcium magnesium. Because you start screwing with pH and throwing it way up or way down, there's all sorts of other things that are going to come into play there that doesn't have anything to do with the calcium magnesium ratio. Okay? This study is the first to comprehensively evaluate the effect of base cation saturation ratio on soil health, including physical, chemical, and biological parameters. Okay, this was a 6-year study. The specific objectives were to evaluate the effects of base cation saturation ratio on soil physical, chemical, and biological health and organic grain crop productivity. Now, I'm going to go through the methodology, but I'm going to... whoops, I didn't have that on. So I'm going to go through the methodology, but not all of it. You can actually just pause the video and read the methodology if you want to know what exactly everything they did and how they did it. But whenever someone says, and I don't want to say everybody, but I get a giggle. This definitely needs to go into the BS disorder manual. When someone says it increases soil stability or soil aggregation, I get a giggle out of that. I get a kick out of that because I don't think they have a clue even how to measure that. I really don't. I don't think they've ever measured it. I don't think they've ever read an article that even showed how to measure it. In this article, they're going to describe exactly how they measured it. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but you're welcome to pause it and you can read exactly how there's many ways to measure it, but you can read exactly how these particular authors measured soil aggregation. Because I can't imagine, well, it just, that you can just say anything. Well, it increases soil aggregation. And you say, well, how do you know? They don't know. They don't even know what that even means usually, much less how to measure it. Most people. It's a whistle word. Soil aggregation is what it is. It gets your attention. But it needs to go into the BS manual because I doubt seriously if many people even know what they're talking about, much less know how to measure it. Regardless. 2 field trials were established in 2015 at the Herzl and West Badger sites in Ohio. So all my friends in the audience just north of Kentucky, up in Ohio, this is in your area. The Herzl site is located near the city of Bowling Green in Hoytville Clay Loam in Wood County, Ohio. And then the West Badger site is located near Apple Creek in Wayne County on a can-filled silt loam. Herzl and West Badger have been under certified organic production since 2004 and 1998. And that's another thing that, the BS base cation saturation con artists will say, well, you just did this for 1 year or 2 years and it wasn't long enough. Well, they did this for 6 years. Well, before it was there, it was something, you're doing it on organic farming, but what was there beforehand? Well, beforehand it was actually in certified organic farming, so no matter what you do, they always like to move the goalposts regardless. So they're making the authors here. I'm just inferring this. I don't know if they intended that, but they're making a point of saying this was under certified organic farming for several years before we even started. Okay. And they were previously in agronomic grain and forage rotations before 1998. Baseline soil properties were measured across crop replicate combinations in the spring of 2015 before planting and amendment applications. That's a little bit of stats there, not much, but soil values reflecting different starting points regarding base cation saturation management, as Herzl had calcium and magnesium saturation values that would be considered relatively balanced, while West Badger soil did not. Okay, so I'm going to show you these soil values here down here. What he's talking about is, soil treatment, or table 1. What he's talking about is right here. So the West Badger site had both of these had cation exchange capacities of Herzl had 22 and West Badger had 10. So that negates any of the con artists saying that, well, this wasn't an appropriate site because the CEC was too low. I've heard that I don't know how many times. Well, CEC was only 8, so it's not valid on a soil CEC 8. Okay, well, this was 10 and 22. Okay, so the the calcium saturation at Herzl was 68, which I think, like I said, like the author said, that most people would say, most of the base cation saturation people would say that's fine. But the West Badger was 37, so this would be a good location to see the effect of suddenly adjusting it based upon base cation saturation theory, because it's not in the range of base cation saturation to begin with. Okay, there's some statistics here. I encourage you to pause this. I'm not going to go all the way through this, but they talk about how it was set up. The 3 treatments were Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate, heptahydrate, gypsum, which was calcium sulfate, dihydrate, and an untreated control. Now, experimental plots measured, and this is the other thing. A lot of people, there's just so many times they've moved the goalposts. It's ridiculous. Whenever you get everything set up, they go, "Oh, this was only done on 6 by 6 meter plots or 3 by 3 meter plots. The plots weren't big enough." These plots were 4.6 meters by 85 meters long, and the other one was 6 meters by 12 meters long. So one of the plots was dang near the length of a football field. Okay, so the plots are plenty big. All right, so that marks that off as a possible, moving the goalposts. They'll find other reasons to shoot holes in it. They always do. Amendment applications were based on the baseline calcium-magnesium ratios and input from our stakeholder advisory committee consisting of farmers and crop consultants who were actively participating in base count saturation. Oh, thanks, Leslon, for your membership. Appreciate it. So that's another thing that these base count saturation wizards will say, and the magicians will say. They'll say, well, the scientists just set this up. They didn't even consult with any of the farmers, any of the salesmen. They didn't do it right. Well, right here, again, this is the reason I love this paper. These authors are saying, we set it up with calcium magnesium with input from stakeholders, advisory committees consisting of farmers and crop consultants who are using base count saturation. So in other words, they included them. And I highly encourage my fellow scientists, when you're doing something that is potentially controversial, like you're measuring nitrogen leaching from fertilizer applications, and because you have one side who's saying you shouldn't apply any fertilizer, and then one side saying, well, you're fine. I encourage you to include the other side in the initial process. It sounds a little bit foreign, but this is the way to have civil discourse. Don't exclude them. Don't exclude your enemy, basically, your combatant. Don't exclude them from the beginning. Include them. Let's be inclusive. Include them in. Get their input. Listen to it. Include it. Let's get all in agreement and then execute the study, as long as it's still scientifically valid, as long as they don't alter it in some biased way. And that's what they did here. Lushalon says, could I Google translate the German one? I don't know. Maybe. I guess I could. Maybe there's got to be some sort of AI. Maybe there's some sort of translation AI system that can translate German to English in an easy way. Maybe I'll try that, man. It's a good suggestion, Lush. Gypsum was applied to increase calcium-magnesium ratios. Gypsum is calcium sulfate. And Epsom salt was applied to decrease calcium-magnesium ratios. Over 6 years, from 2015 to 2022, they talk about the magnesium. 11 and 12 megagrams per hectare gypsum and 13 and 12 megagrams of Epsom were applied cumulatively, to these two locations. So that's how they set it up. 3 crops were planted annually: corn, soybeans, and small grain, spelt or oat. So those are the crops they had here on these plots, and you're welcome to pause the video and read more about it if you want. In several instances, yields were not obtainable due to either crop failure from weed infestations — remember, this is organic farming — or poor initial establishment, or because conditions remained too wet for planting. So when you're in the middle of a 6-year study, stuff's going to happen. A lightning bolt's going to hit your tree and going to fall over, or whatever. There's all sorts of crazy stuff happens. And people say, oh, well, this happened, or flooded, and you can't include that. Well, I have much more confidence in field research data, even with all that stuff, mainly because of all that stuff. This is real life situation. All these things happen. You're driving and a hydraulic hose breaks and burns a whole line across your plots. It happens. You have to account for it. That's real life stuff. Although, it's unfortunate when that stuff happens. That's what happens. And that's the reason I value field research much more when using, when developing recommendations than I do greenhouse work, although I value greenhouse work, just not as much as field work. And I value lab work, but just not as much as greenhouse work, and so forth. That's kind of how it works in my mind. Soil sample collection. Soil samples at both sites. Study sites were collected at the end of each growing season from the surface of 0 to 20 centimeters of all plots. The calcium-magnesium ratios were calculated from the extractable soil cation concentrations. Very easy. And they talk about the method they used. Soil biological health parameters. Notice they say soil biological health measurements. No, permanganate oxidizable carbon was quantified according to the Wheel 2003 method, with modification from Coleman 2012 method. And here's the method they used, and you can read that if you want. Mineralizable carbon dioxide respired upon rewetting dry soil, was determined by measuring the carbon dioxide evolved during 24 hours aerobic incubation. And you can read how they did that. Soil protein was quantified using neutral sodium citrate buffer. And you can read how they did that right here. And then remember, they're not saying this is soil biology. These are measurements of soil biology. And then they're going to use these measurements as a means to say, yes, this influenced soil biological health or whatever parameters. Okay, soil physical measurements. Soil aggregate stability was measured by slaking of submerged soil in water using a Yoder apparatus and the method given by Kemper and Rosenet, 1986. Now, how many people are familiar with how to do that? I mean, let's be honest. Almost no one knows how to do that method. Okay, soil scientists know how to do that method. Some soil scientists, not all. Some soil scientists know, but most people don't. So when someone says, "Oh, it influences the soil aggregation," well, how do you know? Did you follow this method or another similar method? Probably not. Probably not. So I don't have much confidence in you just saying it increases soil aggregation. It's crazy. But you can read exactly how we measure soil aggregation right here. You can read this whole paragraph, and if you want to, you can go copy it and follow exactly how to do your own soil aggregation measurements. The aggregate stability of the soil is given as a mean weight diameter, or MWD, in millimeters, which is calculated as the sum of products of the mean diameter of each size class and the relative proportion of aggregates in that size class. So if you want to know soil aggregation, that's how to do it. Follow that paragraph. Soil water infiltration at both sites was measured in the fall of 2018-2019 using a mini disc infiltrometer adjusted to a -2 centimeter suction rate to minimize macro pore flow. The penetration resistance of the soil was measured in the fall of 2019 using an electronic spot-on cone penetrometer. That's just a big rod that you push into the ground. You guys have probably seen it. 30 penetrometer readings were taken systematically at 0 to 10 and 10 to 20 centimeter depths. In each plot, for each depth, the average of 30 readings was calculated at a final plot measurement. So all they're saying is they just took a lot of samples within each plot, took the average. But that gives you an idea of the compaction of the soil. That penetrometer will kind of give you an idea of how dense the soil is based upon the resistance or the force it takes to drive that rod into the soil. So now they have the whole thing set up. They have the base kind of saturation. They're applying calcium, Epsom salt or gypsum or nothing based upon the calcium magnesium ratios. They're measuring all sorts of soil health parameters. They're measuring compaction. They're measuring soil aggregation. And we're going to see what happens. Okay. It's a lot of work over 6 years. And they're growing corn and I think it was soybeans, if I'm not mistaken. 2 different locations, by the way. Data analysis. You can read more about data analysis, but basically the crop and amendment effects were assumed as fixed in blocks. The crop and amendment effects were assumed as fixed, and block was considered as a random effect, with year as a repeated measure for the yield data. If the yield data were significantly different by year and site, ANOVA was run for each year and site separately. So the only reason I'm saying that is I really discourage people from going out and just doing their own research. And I'm going to use this as an example. If you go out and you say, as soon as we're done with the introduction and the materials method, we're going to go right into the results as soon as I say this. If you go out and you apply like treatments to your lawn or to your fairway or to your golf course or sport, football field or whatever, and you say, I'm going to rep this out, I'm going to block this, I'm going to do 2 or 3 replications and I'm going to do it squared out and everything's fine. And you block it out and you have a non-treated control and you try to do everything's correct. You do your best. And you apply nitrogen or you don't apply nitrogen. And then you just measure the quality over time. You can see what happens. I mean, you can go out there and look at it. But if you want to see if there's actually differences between nitrogen sources or differences between whatever, and you're measuring the same plot over time, you have to know how to measure the data correctly using repeated measures. What is that? A repeated measure is necessary when you're doing the sampling on the same subject over time repeatedly, because let's say you take a sample of, let's say you take a sample of, let's just do turf quality, and there's a certain amount of error on day 1. And then you go to day 4 and you take another reading, and there's a certain amount of error on day 4. But the error on day 4 is also subjected to the error on day 1. So the error continues to get compounded over time if you don't account for it. So the reason I'm saying that is a little bit more detail than I think anybody cares to know, but you have to account for that properly And that's by using repeated measures. That removes the compounding error problem. Well, if you don't know anything about it and you just go out and start spraying stuff out and you actually want to see if there's any statistical differences and you don't have a clue how to run it statistically correct, then you may end up with the wrong conclusion. Probably, well, you will end up with the wrong conclusion if you're not using repeated measures. Whatever. Too much boring stuff, I know, but I felt compelled to say that because a lot of people, it seems simple. Well, I can go out and just take a harvest and collect tissue on this date and see what happens. You can, that's true. But if you do it over time on the same plot, you have to know how to do it correctly with the right statistics. Okay, back onto the interesting stuff. Sorry. Results and discussion. Extractable soil nutrient levels and calcium-magnesium ratios. Application of gypsum and Epsom salt over 5 years influenced soil malic-3 extractable calcium and magnesium. You're applying calcium sulfate and magnesium sulfate. It's going to influence the calcium-magnesium levels. Gypsum application increased soil extractable calcium at both sites. And the increases were statistically significant only at the West Badger site, though, which had a lower cation exchange capacity than the clay loam at the Herzl site. Epsom salt significantly increased extractable magnesium levels at both sites relative to the control. So, I'm going to go up there and show these data in a second. The decrease in availability of soil magnesium with gypsum application and conversely the decrease in calcium availability with Epsom's application demonstrated the antagonistic effect among soil nutrients. However, these reductions did not cause cation levels to drop below critical levels, so the risk of base cation nutrient deficiency was highly unlikely. So what they're saying is this. Here's the table, and here's the calcium. Now, we're looking at control Epsom salt, which remembers magnesium sulfate, and gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. So when we're applying when we're applying calcium, we didn't see anything happen in this section of Herzl site, but down here, when we're applying calcium, we see the calcium go up. It's very simple. But we also see the magnesium go down from the control. Here's the control at 905, and the calcium went down when we applied magnesium to 764. It went up when we applied calcium. It went down when we applied magnesium. And what they're saying is that the application of one cation influenced the other. It reduced the other. And I wanted to point that out because that's one reason why we want to be extremely careful about applying any element. We want to have a good reason to apply elements. And if you don't have a good reason, you're possibly going to run into causing more problems than you're curing. You may end up, in this case, calcium's probably never going to be low, but low enough to see a deficiency. But let's say potassium is right at the critical limit, and you go out. In this case, it did not affect potassium. But let's say you went out and you're right at the limit, and it did knock off potassium, and now your potassium's below the critical limit. You may end up causing potassium deficiencies rather than trying to cure some other, imaginary problem in your base cation saturation world. So we just want to have a good reason. And the good reason is your turf grass looks deficient or looks poor, or you had a historic problem in that area and a soil test confirms that and so forth. Then those are good reasons to begin including that into your program. Otherwise, I would not just start throwing it out just because you've always done it. And here we see when in the world of extractable magnesium, when we applied magnesium, it went from 517 parts per million to 655 parts per million when we applied magnesium. In the Herzl site. In the West Badger site, we also saw when we applied magnesium sulfate, the magnesium went up from 215 to 317. So it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, is what their point is. They applied magnesium sulfate and calcium sulfate, and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, at both locations, because we're applying magnesium and calcium sulfate, look what happens to the sulfate. The sulfur goes up from the control. It went from 12 to 54 using magnesium sulfate, and from 12 to 80 or 75 using calcium sulfate at one location. And then the next location went from 9 to 18 and from 9 to 28 using gypsum. So both applications, the Epsom salt and the gypsum, are doing what they're supposed to be doing in the soil in terms of adding calcium or adding magnesium or adding sulfur. Okay? Application of gypsum and Epsom significantly increased malic-3 sulfur levels, just as I mentioned. As expected, application of either gypsum or Epsom salt did not affect soil pH. Neither one of them influenced soil pH. Similarly, gypsum and Epsom applications did not alter soil K levels. So you see the soil pH was at 6.8 and basically is at one location, it was at 6.4 at the other location, and they never changed. And in this particular setting, the potassium was 205 and 203 at the other location, and they didn't change. They're basically the exact same. Oftentimes you'll see the potassium be altered when you're applying calcium or magnesium. In this particular instance, they did not. Okay. Gypsum applications increase calcium-magnesium ratios as they're supposed to, and Epsom salt applications decrease calcium-magnesium ratios, which they were supposed to. Figure 1, that was their purpose. That was their methodology. We're going to do this to increase it. We're going to do that to decrease it. And sure enough, that's exactly what it did. Okay, and here's the graphs to show it. Calcium-magnesium ratio on the y-axis, year 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19, and then the 2 locations. And you see when they're applying, when they did nothing as the blue, it goes from calcium-magnesium ratio to like from 8 to about 7 over time in one location. But when you applied gypsum, it went from 8 and it went up to about 8.5. But when you applied Epsom salt, it went from 8 down to about 5. So Epsom salt is reducing calcium-magnesium ratio and gypsum's increasing. And the same thing happened at West Badger, where the Epsom salt reduced the calcium-magnesium ratio and the gypsum increased the calcium-magnesium ratio. So they're just simply saying our methodology worked in terms of what we were trying to do relative to the calcium-magnesium ratio. Now, now soil biological health. Gypsum and Epsom application had no effect on measured soil biological health properties. Now, if I was to provide just one little bitty critique, and that is the treatments don't have anything. You know, nitrogen doesn't have anything. Gypsum doesn't possess anything. Gypsum and Epsom salt resulted in, or did not result in. So that's just a little piece of, support for the authors and their writing styles. But gypsum and Epsom salt did not result in any effect on the measured soil biological properties, and that's in Table 3. So you can see right here, Table 3, the permanganate oxidizable carbon, nothing happened. Mineralizable carbon, nothing happened. And the soil protein, nothing happened. Okay? Nothing. And this was at the end of 6 years of repeated applications. Okay? And now we're going to go to, we're still in it. Numerous studies have demonstrated that these 3 indicators, permanganate oxidizable carbon, mineralizable carbon, and soil protein, are sensitive to recent changes in management and more sensitive than total soil organic matter or soil organic carbon across diverse agroecosystems. So they can change. They're sensitive to it. Practitioners of base cation saturation often describe improvements in soil biological activity and balanced soils. Our results suggest that after 5 years, manipulating calcium-magnesium ratios had no measurable impact on soil biological health at either location. Straightforward. Now, soil physical properties. Soil aggregation. It softens the soil. It reflocculates the soil. All these, hocus pocus, grandiose, non-evidence-based assertions that people make, that these base cation saturation con job artists make. Soil aggregate stability was not affected by application of gypsum or Epsom at both locations. As expected, there were significant differences between 2 sites in terms of soil aggregation, the mean weight diameter, with the mean weight diameter of the Herzl significantly higher. So the 2 locations had different diameter sizes, but nothing affected it within locations. Okay. Let's see. So let me just go to Table 4. So here's Table 4. What they're talking about is mean weight diameter in millimeters. So this is when we're talking about soil aggregation as a soil scientist, this is what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in some marketing flyer or some YouTube, spiel about our products will increase soil aggregation. I'm not interested in that. This is what I'm interested in. And right here it shows the control, the Epsom salt, and the gypsum after 5 years, nothing changed. They're all the same at Herzl site, and they're all the same at the West Badger site. Now, the West Badger site had different soil aggregation than the other side. That's just understandable. They're different soils. But within each soil, after 5 years of applying all this calcium and all this magnesium, nothing affected the soil aggregation. So you're welcome to read through that. Oh, whoops, I didn't show it. So you're welcome to read through these data tables. These results provide no evidence to support the common belief of soil balancing practitioners that base cation saturation alters soil aggregation and therefore soil structure. So there's no evidence in this paper. And this is, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, call it however you want to call it, this is really one of the disadvantages of science, because we can't say it didn't do it, right? We can't say that these treatments did not affect it, because that would be making a negative claim. We can't claim something as a negative. Instead, we have to say there was no evidence to support the assertion. So, and that's what they say. We provided no evidence to support the common belief. That's what we have to say. And it's not as firm as what, marketing and sales can say when you're in the business. You can just say, oh, it's going to increase soil structure. Well, and then we come out and say, well, we didn't find any evidence that it was increased soil structure. Instead of saying, no, it's not going to increase soil structure. Okay. But we can't say that as scientists. As a practitioner or as a pragmatist, I can say that. It's not going to increase soil structure. Okay. As a scientist, we can't say that. So that's one of the disadvantages of the way we have to say things in science, that we can't say things with such certainty. We can't make a negative claim, right? So, yeah, it is what it is. Now we continue. Applications of Epsom or gypsum did not significantly affect soil penetration resistance at either of the study sites. Yeah, you're welcome, Gray. So here's the penetration resistance. So this is, remember, they're pushing this rod into the ground, and this is kilopascals here, and then they have infiltration in centimeters per hour over here. So this is measuring like the compaction really of the soil, and what it says right here. Treatments did not significantly affect penetration resistance. And you can see the data right here. There were differences within soils. There were differences from this one soil had different resistance than the other soil, but the treatments didn't affect either of the soils. Okay. It was the exact same. And the same thing was true for infiltration rate. The infiltration rate was the same. There was no differences. The treatments didn't affect it at all. High penetration resistance observed at the West Badger site indicates that the soil was compacted. So that's a good thing in terms of soil testing. We want to test it on a compacted soil, compare with those of the Herzl site. And you can see right here, the West Badger, you can see the kilopascals are 1,500 and compared to the Herzl site, which is 500. So the West Badger site was considered compacted. This can be mostly attributed to the coarse nature of soils found at the West Badger rather than changes in calcium-magnesium ratio caused by gypsum or Epsom salt. So in other words, the control is the same exact thing as the other one. So nothing happened. It was just the soil itself was compacted. Water infiltration rates were also not significantly affected by gypsum or Epsom salt at either site. Nothing happened with water infiltration. The positive or negative effects associated with calcium and magnesium were not observed in this study, as substantiated by unchanged soil aggregate stability in Table 4. So again, over here, the infiltration, nothing changed. And I get a real kick out of like the salesmen and the companies who try to sell this on a USGA putting green or a California style green, which is all sand. There is no structure in those soils. They're structureless soil or root zones. They're not soils. A USGA spec green and a California style green are not soils. They're root zones and they're structureless. So there's no need or reason to follow base cation saturation in terms of it having some sort of effect on soil structure, because there is no soil structure. It's not designed to have soil structure. Okay, you don't need it in that particular setting. But some people will sell it like that. Well, you need to increase your soil structure in your putting green. You're not going to. It's all sand. It's ridiculous. It's structureless. You get a kick out of that. It's crazy. Okay. So crop yields, this is really the important thing. And all this, having said all this, they're talking about soil parameters here and nothing has affected it. But when it comes to crop yields, if suddenly you go, the crop yield was 3x, or even if it was 1.2x, or if it was, some measurable increase, well, I'm like, well, okay, you can do whatever you want to the soil, but if my yield is going up by 20%, then I might be on board. So having said all that, let's look at crop yields. Application of either gypsum or Epsom salt to alter calcium magnesium ratios did not have any significant effect on either corn or soybean grain yields in any of the years, nor were there any discernible trends found with treatments over 6 years, indicating application of amendments had no impact on crop productivity. But I can guarantee you this, it had an impact on that farmer's bottom line. He had to buy that, and he had to spread that. He had to take time and spread that, and you had to ship it in and buy it. So all that money on all that gypsum and all that Epsom salt was just wasted. It was right out of his pocket. And there was zero benefit in terms of crop yield. And so far, zero benefit in terms of the soil aggregation or penetrate or compaction or anything. There was no benefit so far at all. There was no significant relationship between crop yields and calcium magnesium ratios over 6 years of this experiment, figure 2, for Herzl or West Badger site. This indicates that there was no ideal base cation saturation ratio where yields of corn and soybeans were maximized. Now look at this. This is what I want to show, figure 2. And you're going to see this when we get into some of the Baer papers, Furman Baer papers, where we look at soil calcium magnesium ratios on the x-axis and grain yield on the y-axis. And this is a very, very common graph in the world of base cation saturation. And even Furman Baer, who invented this whole thing, he shows in his 45 paper, and I believe in his 48 paper, graphs just like this. And he says, yeah, it doesn't really matter. I don't know why he said it to begin with. He said it matters in 45, and in the same year he said, it doesn't really matter. And he shows graphs that show it. And you'll see right here, soybeans are orange and corn is blue, and the grain yield is straight across flat from soil calcium magnesium ratios from basically 0 all the way up to 10. Oh, this is probably 4 actually, 4 to 10 in the Herzl site, and from 2 to 7 in the West Badger site. Soil calcium magnesium ratios are all over the place, and there's not a lick of difference in the yield. Nothing. If anything, you can make an argument that the corn yield might actually be going down as the soil calcium magnesium goes up. But there is no significant effect of calcium magnesium ratio. None. On the most important variable, which is, and for these particular farmers, which is yield. Okay? Where am I at here? Okay. Now, I'm going to finish this up. I'm almost done here. I'm going to finish up with a couple little tidbits. McLean in 83 tested the yields of response of corn and soybeans in Ohio, and I'm going to go over McLean's 83 paper. These authors reported that calcium magnesium ratio ranged between 2.3 and 26, and that there was no ideal ratio where crop yields were maximized. So here's McLean paper. Another one. I'm going to get a scoreboard too, by the way, like I was doing with the other papers before June. I had a scoreboard. I'm going to have a scoreboard up here on Monday for the members, and I'll have the articles listed and which ones are having an effect and which ones aren't. Our results, therefore, support the conclusions derived from previous studies that crop yields would not be affected by base cation saturation as long as sufficient levels of nutrients are maintained to meet crop demands. Okay, the last paragraph here in the conclusions. Repeated applications of gypsum and Epsom significantly altered calcium magnesium ratios at both study sites, meaning their method did what it was supposed to do in terms of that. Despite these differences, we found no effect of calcium magnesium ratios on grain yields or either corn or soybeans in any of the 6 years of the study. In addition, despite testimonials of altered soil structure with changing calcium magnesium ratios from base cation saturation practitioners, we did not find any evidence of altered soil structure in this study, as aggregate stability, penetration resistance, and water infiltration were not affected by either Epsom or gypsum applications. Soil biological health was also not impacted by either gypsum or Epsom applications, as there were no significant differences observed with oxidizable carbon, mineralizable, or soil protein. We therefore conclude that this study provides no evidence to support an ideal cation saturation ratio where maximum yields are found. Our data corroborated other reports that yields are not related to base cation ratios. Overall, our results align with conclusions of previous studies, providing no objective evidence to support the claims of base cation saturation theory with respect to soil health and crop yields. I mean, how much more clear can you get when it comes to base cation saturation? I'm going to move this back to subscribers and see if anybody wants to ask a question. I had a goofball in here earlier and I had to switch it to members only. So I had back to subscribers. So if you want to ask a question, Eric or any of this, Ignacio, anybody who was here as a subscriber but not a member, feel free to put something in the chat. I can monitor it now a little bit better. But basically, this is one paper among many. And honestly, at this point, and this is real money. They spent 6 years. I don't know who funded this. Let's see who funded this, actually. They had this funded here somewhere. I don't know if I can see who funded this study. Usually, if it's funded, they'll have an acknowledgement of who funded it. But in the acknowledgements, I don't see. Oh, this work was supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a NIFA Organic Agriculture Research and Extensive Initiative. So this is, Department of Agriculture. This is tax dollars going to do a project that it just says the same thing that the other 50 have said, and nothing's going to happen. Oh, by the way, check this out. This is interesting. I just saw this. Look at the acknowledgments. The authors would like to thank these following people. And look in here. We also like to thank Douglas Jackson Smith, Matthew Kleinheinz, and Bill McKibben, Raymond Yoder. Okay, so there's several really, really good people in here. But Bill McKibben, I may be wrong. I don't want to be incorrect here, but I believe Bill McKibben is one of the base kind of saturation magicians who is, subscribes to this nonsense. I don't want to speak. I shouldn't say that because I'm not 100% confident that that's the one I'm thinking of. But they're saying, they're basically pointing out that these people contributed, like they said at the beginning, to some portion of the work when they said we included consultants and farmers who use this methodology when conducting this work. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the gentleman who works with the Earth people. What's the Earth? Whatever, I can't remember. Earthworks, is that the name of the company? Earthworks. And he's the one who keeps them fully indoctrinated into base kind of saturation, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I shouldn't say that because I don't want to. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Someone can point it out, and I'll pin it in the comments if I'm wrong about that. But I think that's what that is. And but anyway, the point is that this is real tax dollars. Someone has to fund this. And it's like, really? I mean, if these farmers would follow the evidence and the consultants would stop trying to fleece the industry, we could spend money on more important things that would actually move our industry forward, move the farming community forward, rather than continuing to go over the same old crap that doesn't change anything. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. We're spending, who knows how much that costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars by either the U.S. Department of Ag or the NIFA Organic Agriculture Research Extension Initiative. They've had a grad student on there, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over 6 years to do that work. Surely that money could be more effectively spent in other areas, but they have all these farmers going out and wasting money on it, throwing out all sorts of calcium, magnesium, and spreading all sorts of stuff out there that doesn't do anything. So I can understand the value in it, but I mean, there's so many papers that say the same thing. It's just like, come on, guys and gals, let's start, following the evidence, and you won't have to waste taxpayer dollars on answering the same question that's been answered for, what is this, 2024, for 80 years. It's been the same answer every time for 80 years. It doesn't result in a more effective system. You're going to have crops that grow fine, just going to cost you a lot of money. Okay, guys and gals. So on Monday, the members stream will start at 10 a.m. And then on Tuesday, I'll have another one, just video only. It'll be a shorter video. It won't be quite so long. So the last one I did was 2 hours long. I probably won't load that to YouTube. I probably won't open it up. But it is on the podcast. It just was really, really long. And I didn't think it wasn't my best work. But on Tuesday, I'll do a shorter video. So I'll try to keep it to an hour. The total thing to an hour. And we'll see how that goes. Okay, guys and gals. Appreciate everybody showing up today. Have a good weekend, and enjoy the music while I let you go, and I'll see all the members on Monday morning. Thanks a lot. See ya. Bye.